Okay, the previous two videos were demonstrations of how we can look at the distribution of one variable. So we saw pie charts as a way to look at one qualitative variable, and we saw the histogram, the box plot, and the stem plot as ways to look at the quantitative variable. What we're going to do here is look at relationships between variables. So first of all, let's say we wanted to know if there was a relationship between gender and age. That is, we wanted to know maybe if the females tended to be older than the males or whatever. The tool for looking at a relationship between quantitative and qualitative, that is, looking at a quantitative variable across a couple of groups, is the parallel box plot. Okay, and to get to that parallel box plot, we're going to select box plot from the graphics menu. Okay, and what we want to look at is the ages. Okay, and we have this option of group by down here, and I want to group them by gender. And so this compares the ages of the women to the ages of the men through a graphic called the parallel box plot. And I think everything else is fine for me to just show you what a parallel box plot looks like. Okay, so basically you got one y-axis with the values on it. And these are both box plots set against that same one axis. So notice it's not the same as just taking the men, finding their box plot, taking the women, finding their box plot, and putting the two box plots side by side. It's critical that they're lined up against the same axis, the same y-axis, so you can compare them. What you can see is roughly these two groups of people, the women and the men, look to be about the same age distribution, roughly. It looks like maybe the higher quartile of the females. The females are a little more spread out. The median ages are right about the same. The boxes overlap each other quite a bit. Okay, now just for grins, talking about parallel box plots, let's do another parallel box plot. This time we're going to do is we're going to compare the ages. And the grouping we're going to do is the people, this group called compare. So you're going to see, if there's any difference between the people who said they shopped more and the people who said they shopped less online, the people who said they shopped about the same. So let's create graph and see what happens. There really isn't that much of a difference. All three of these groups end up with the box plot the same. Turns out really if the boxes don't overlap, that's kind of a good indicator that we're going to see that these groups maybe have some real differences going on. If the boxes overlap like these do here and like the ones on the last example here did, that's a sign that yeah, there's some differences because data vary from sample to sample, but these groups, these three groups are essentially pretty similar. The next comparison we want to talk about, or the next relationship we want to talk about, is quantitative versus quantitative. So I've got these two variables that are quantitative, percent and age. And I want to see if there's a relationship between the percentage of online shopping you did and the age of the person doing this. So we're going to see if age is predicting what percentage of amount they shop at. So usually it doesn't much matter which goes on which, but if you're trying to use one to kind of explain the other. So we have this theory that maybe the older people shop less online than the younger people do. I don't know. Then I'm going to say that age is the one that explains what's going on, and percentage is the response variable, the thing we think is affected by age. Okay, we're going to create a graph here and see what happens. And there looks like kind of a cloud of points. There's a slight tendency to have more high values of y on this end of the graph, on the right end of the graph, than there are on the left end of the graph. And what that tends to tell you is there's maybe a mild relationship between the age of the respondent and the percentage of shopping they plan to do online. But it isn't very strong at all. But you can definitely see it. So there's some, but there's just probably not much. Okay? That's a scatter plot that talks about the relationship between age and percent to quantitative variables. Well, now we've talked about comparing two quantitative variables and a relationship between a quantitative and a qualitative variable. Final thing left is the relationship between a qualitative and a qualitative variable. To do that, we're going to use the bar plot with data. Okay, and again with data, just like with the pie charts, with data men we're using data as opposed to an already made frequency table. Okay, so we look at data, and what I want to do the bar plot of is, you know, I can pick either one of these. I'm going to pick the variable compare, and I'm going to group it by gender. And so what that's going to do, well, let's just look at the graph that it produces. It produces essentially side-by-side bar graphs. Now these are not histograms because they aren't dealing with quantitative data. But what we've got is three groups of bars, and the bars are different colored. All the blue bars are females, all the red bars are males. The first group of bar compares the people who spent less, the people who've done more, the people who shopped about the same. And so what it looks like is more of the females seem to say, the people who responded that they shopped less seem to be predominantly female or more female. The other two groups seem to be more male. In fact, by comparison, the people who shop the same seem to be, you know, the biggest difference between the male and female. I don't like the order of this because it seems that I would love to see less to same to more go left to right. But that was the default ordering that this gave it. That's because there's a little bit of quantitative information in that variable compare.